Radeon Pro is definitely not your father's FirePro. From the gleaming blue shell to its more modern, sleek casing, it's definitely a new generation of workstation card. Besides the expected architecture refresh and more performance, these cards natively support the regular Radeon graphics drivers, so newer games and day one patches are available for everybody. One thing you can't do with these cards is overclock them. However, you can use a BIOS editing software, and that can let you unlock the card to do more things. In my case, what I did was increase the memory speed, which is something that other variations of this card already have by default, and increase the power limits so that it can use the full 75 watts available to it. Though in practice, it uses more like 53. Is that enough to make this a gaming card? Starting off with Overwatch and at 1080p low settings, and we can see that this card is more than capable of playing Overwatch, even at high frame rates. With performance north of 100 FPS at all times, if you are looking for a locked 60 FPS, you have power to spare when either increasing the resolution or increasing the settings. If you're terrible at this game, it's definitely not because of this card. Next up is Lost Ark, and at medium quality settings for 1080p, we are at pretty much a locked 60 FPS. This game does cap you out at 60 FPS, so it's not exactly sure how much headroom there is there. High is a little bit below 60 FPS, but at the medium quality settings, you are pretty much locked in at 60 FPS at all times, and the only visible hitches are really due to asset streaming. Rolled out plays very well on the WX 4100. Though it can't quite reach 60 FPS at 1080p on the high settings, with a 70% resolution modifier, you do get a pretty much locked in 60 FPS at all times. You could lower the settings down a bit if you wanted a full 1080p image, but since the high quality setting is drastically different than what the medium setting is, I think this is the best compromise for visuals. TemTem plays very well on this card at 1080p and the medium quality presets, which, since the medium is only one step below the ultra quality settings, is a very good presentation. Ultra quality is playable if you wanted to go for more like a capped 30 FPS, but since the difference in quality between medium and ultra is actually not that big, I would stick with 60 FPS. With Dirt 3, we finally have a workstation card that can play this game maxed out at 1080p at 60 FPS. With the average frame rate being closer to 65 to 70 and the minimum frame time never going below 60, it's pretty amazing to see this tiny little card pump out 60 FPS in this game. Since games like Sonic Generation, Super Auto Pets, and Townscaper would obviously cap out at 60 FPS on this card, I decided to remove them and add in Hellblade, which was recently updated to allow FSR support, so that's actually what I used for this test. At 1080p, medium quality settings on the balanced FSR preset, we get an average of 60 FPS in this game. Maybe a little bit below that in certain scenes and above that in other scenes. So you could play with the settings a little bit if you wanted to get a locked 60 FPS at all times, or you could also just drop down the FSR to performance, though the hit in visuals is probably not worth it, and I would stick with this balanced preset with the medium quality settings.
The river of knives across which lies the halls of hell, the place they call Helheim.
At 720p, low quality settings, control runs well above 60 FPS, even when the action heats up. This by itself is pretty impressive, and if you were looking for an increase in visual quality, you could either go up to the medium quality settings or go to 1080p native, and that would give you somewhere more in the 30 to 40 FPS range, so with a 30 FPS cap, it would be a pretty good experience there too. Torchlight 2 runs well on pretty much everything I've found, and the WX 4100 is no exception, with frame rates staying above 60 FPS even when there is a lot of action on screen, and more like 150 FPS when there is nothing happening on screen and just exploring. Any game like Dota 2 or Diablo 3 from around this era would play very well on this card. Timberborn plays at 60 FPS at the ultra quality settings, with one exception. For some reason, the ultra quality settings gives us a little bit of an issue when we're looking at the wheat, if you zoom in. So putting it down into the high settings alleviates that, but yeah, it's still a good experience either way. Halo Infinite at 1080p low quality settings. It was a little bit map dependent, but is going to be somewhere in the 25 FPS range with no other adjustments. You could lower the render resolution yourself down to like 720p, but what I would choose to do is actually just change the 30 FPS minimum frame times, and that would dynamically adjust your settings in order to hit a minimum of 30 FPS. Unfortunately, you can't hit 60 FPS with this card, but with a 30 FPS, that's the same as what you would get on, say, an Xbox One S. But unless you are looking to play competitively with this card, I would say it's a pretty good experience. The Radeon Pro WX 4100 is available on places like eBay for somewhere in the neighborhood of like $100 to $125. And with the prices of GPUs falling still, I would say that this could be a very good deal if you are looking for a low profile card, since the only thing really faster than this would be either like a T600 from NVIDIA or the A2000, though none of those are quite as blue.